Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, we are talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers and previewing the upcoming 2020-2021 season and really talking about what this season could look like for the Cavs. Before I get too far into it, I want to remind you all to leave a like and subscribe. I've been appreciating all the support that I've been receiving lately, and I hope to see that continue. Without further ado, let's get into the action with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Before we talk too much about the roster itself, I want to talk about the transactions that this team made this offseason. In the draft, they only had one pick, and that happened to be the 5th overall pick, where they selected Isaac Okoro, a wing from Auburn. I liked this pick quite a bit. He was right in the same tier as the other players that I think they likely should have been considering, guys like Denny Avdia, Onyeka Okongwu, Tyrese Halliburton. And in the end, he actually is probably the best fit on this roster, both as of right now and also moving forward. So I do like this pick for the Cavaliers. We'll have more on Okoro a bit later. In terms of trades, they really only made one deal, and that was swapping Jordan Bell and Alfonso McKinnie in exchange for JaVale McGee and a second-round pick. I think that this was a pretty good deal for them because Bell and McKinney are nothing more than end-of-the-bench type guys that are really just roster fillers. And McGee is a competent NBA player who can give you good minutes at the backup center, or they could flip him and turn him into another future second-round pick if they so choose. So overall, a good job by the Cavs in making that trade. In free agency, they made two signings. One of them was re-signing Matthew Dellavedova for a 1-year minimum. Pretty expected going into the offseason. Delly has been a large part of the culture of this team for a while now. I know he left and came to Milwaukee for a few years, but after he got traded back, I assumed that he would probably be a Cav for close to the rest of his career unless he decides he wants to win a championship. That was a bit of a slight jab at the Cavs and their championship hopes, but I do think that Delly has a role on this team, and it was a good choice by the Cavs to bring him back. Another signing they made was getting Damian Dotson on a 2-year, $4 million contract, which is an absolute joke of a deal. Dotson is still a considerably young player that has shown an ability to play a 3-and-D role on a team, which is so incredibly important in the NBA, and the fact that the Cavaliers were able to get him on such a cheap deal was just a really, really good signing by Kobe Altman and the rest of the Cleveland Cavaliers front office. So that's really the transactions that they made. Overall, not a bad offseason for the Cavs, but it wasn't necessarily a good one either. Not a whole lot of super impactful moves, but I did like the Okoro pick. Now, let's talk about this roster a little bit and lay out some expectations I have for each player. Darius Garland is likely going to be the starting point guard for this team. In his rookie season, he actually surprised me a little bit. I thought going in he was going to be more of what Colin Sexton is, as a guy who can really score the ball, but really struggles with his decision-making and playmaking stuff, while also being bad on defense. Well, one thing I was right about was the defensive part. He's not a good defender, but he was actually pretty good in terms of his playmaking and decision-making type stuff prior to, I think he had a groin injury that ended his season a couple weeks before the shutdown. But if he can make good and continue to improve on that playmaking stuff, that's where he can be a super valuable guy for this team. Watching Darius Garland on tape, it kind of reminds me of another young guard in the NBA, which would be Devontae Graham from the Hornets. They're both small guards who have some capabilities as drive and kick guys in the pick and roll that can create some looks for their teammates from the three-point line, and also have some ability as shooters, but neither of them are good finishers because of their slight frames. They aren't able to finish at the rim very well, and they're both bad on defense. But we did see Devontae Graham get in the conversation for most improved player this past season, so I do think that Garland has been a bit overlooked based off of his numbers alone, and I think that there's a chance that we could see him have a much improved second season. Dante Exum is probably the backup point guard on this team for the time being. Exum is kind of an interesting player. They got him obviously in the Jordan Clarkson trade over from the Utah Jazz, and he's a pretty intriguing player because he's actually a pretty skilled scorer at the rim. He's a really good finisher for a guard. He finishes at a level that you would expect from a forward, so that's super impressive from a guy who is a point guard. And he's also really good in transition. I think I might have said that before. And he can guard well at the point of attack on the defensive end of the floor. Now, all of that makes him sound like a pretty solid NBA player, at least someone that should be in a rotation somewhere, if not a starter. So why was there no interest in him? Well, there's two primary reasons. Number one, he's injury prone. The last time he played more than 42 games in an entire NBA season was in his second season in the league, where he played 66 games for the Utah Jazz. Ever since then, he's struggled with injuries, playing anywhere from 14 to 42 games, but never more than that because of injuries. If we can see Exum stay healthy, that'll be a big contributor to him getting another contract following his expiring deal this offseason. The other area that he needs to improve is shooting the basketball. He's struggled throughout his career to shoot from three, and it really has not gotten better at any point. If he wants to stick around and make himself a legit rotational guy on a competitive team, and maybe even a back-end starting point guard at some time in his career, he's really got to iron out that shooting, because the other stuff in his game is pretty impressive. He's maybe not a full point guard, more of a combo guard type, because he does not have much playmaking ability, but he's a good finisher and he's good on defense. So the combination of that, along with if he can shoot the ball and stay healthy, will make him a better player. He's got to make those improvements, though, for that to happen. The third point guard on the team is Matthew Dellavedova, fan favorite. Everybody loves Delly. Plays hard, is a good defensive player, and keeps the ball moving on offense, knows his role, doesn't try to do too much. He's a minimum guy, and he's a really good locker room player who is great for the culture, so I really don't mind them giving him the minimum at all. I question a little bit why he wanted to stay in Cleveland instead of taking the minimum from a competitor where he could have chased a ring, but it's a home for him, so it makes sense. I don't have much more to say about Delly. Fun role player, everybody loves him. At the shooting guard position, we have probably the first building block of this team, the primary guy that they're building around at the moment before we see what Isaac Okoro really has, and that would be Collin Sexton. Sexton is a competitor. I knew that from the first time I had heard about him, but the first time I really watched him was when I get the ESPN notification, Alabama is playing 3-on-5 against Minnesota. Go watch. And I did, and what I saw blew me away. Sexton had 40-plus points in that game. He was fighting the entirety of the game and just giving such great effort. And that's when I thought that this guy had a chance to be a really good player. And it has translated somewhat to the NBA. He continues to be a great competitor, and he works very hard to improve on his game. He's super good at scoring, a good finisher at the rim, a good three-point shooter. He has some ability in the in-between with a floater-type shot. And like I said before, the three-point shooting is good. He shot 38% this past season from three. So that is super valuable, and he gets underrated a lot of the time because people don't see much value in him outside of the scoring, but he really has a super rare ability to put the ball in the basket, and that should not be overlooked. However, like I said before, people do question what else he can do besides score, and those questions are legitimate. He doesn't do much for playmaking whatsoever, has only averaged 3 assists per game for his career so far, and that really needs to improve if he wants to become the lead guard type that you would expect from someone who has the ball in his hands as much as Sexton does. He's also not very good on the defensive end of the floor. He needs to get stronger if he wants to guard well at the point of attack, and he doesn't really make smart decisions in team defensive rotations. So overall, he needs to improve the playmaking and defense. But his scoring ability is so strong that if he can make those happen, this guy still truly does have all-star potential. And based off of what I saw in that game where he was playing 3-on-5 in college, I would bet on Colin Sexton making an all-star game at some point in his career. I think this guy is pretty good right now, and he has a chance to get even better throughout his career. Congratulations, Cleveland. You got a good one. Kevin Porter Jr. is the next guy. He's maybe more of like a wing, a 2-3 type guy than a pure 2, but I see him more as a shooting guard at this point in his career than a small forward. Most of that is due to his defensive liabilities. He's not too good on that end of the floor. However, on offense, he has flashed quite a bit of potential. He can shoot the ball off of the catch and shoot. I believe he shot around 42% on catch and shoot threes this past season, which might kind of blow you away since he shot only 33% overall, but he really struggled anytime he was shooting off the bounce. So if he can iron that out, that'll help improve his game and take it to another level offensively. He's also a really good finisher, and he's a decent playmaker as well. So this guy is exciting. The Cavs got an absolute steal when they drafted him with the 30th pick in last year's draft. And like I said, if he can figure out that three-point shooting off the bounce, we could see this guy score 18 to 20 points in this upcoming season for the Cavs. Once again, similar to Garland, similar to Sexton, doesn't do very well on defense. So he needs to figure that end out in order for him to be a really legit starter-level player in the NBA. But all of the offensive stuff is there, and that makes him an intriguing piece for the Cavs moving forward. Damian Dotson is a guy I mentioned a bit earlier as a 3-and-D wing. Has shot only 36% for his career so far, but I think that is something that could improve because I think that he has really good form. On defense, he's also very competent. He's solid, does his job, good in rotations. He's not a lockdown defender, but he does what you need him to do, and that is very, very important. So overall, like I said, great signing by the Cavs, very good job. And I believe that the second year of his contract is non-guaranteed, so if he comes in and sticks up the joint in Cleveland, then they can just move on from him before next season. So nice signing there by the Cavs. Moving on to the small forward position, rounding out the wings, we have Isaac Okoro, who, alongside Colin Sexton, is really the key piece of this Cavaliers rebuild. Okoro is a perfect guy for them to slot in between the Sexland backcourt and the Kevin Love, Andre Drummond frontcourt. These four guys all struggle defensively. That's something that this Cavs team really has in common. A lot of people think about the Wizards and they say, oh, they were one of the worst defensive teams of all time. Actually, they weren't. They got better towards the end of the season. After the All-Star break, they ranked in the top 20 in defensive rating. The team that took over that spot as the worst team in the NBA on defense, and actually might have been one of the worst teams of all time, was the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Isaac Okoro really addresses that need. He is a very good on-ball defender, probably the best on-ball defender in this entire 2020 draft class. He does a great job moving his feet. He's very strong. He can guard pretty much 1 through 4. I wouldn't quite trust him to guard centers because he's only 6'6", but he's strong enough that he will at least battle. I think that this was a good pick for them for that reason. And on offense, he's a good driver, he's a good finisher, and he makes smart decisions, solid playmaker for his teammates, and he's also a plus rebounder overall on both ends of the floor. Yeah, this guy sounds really good when I say all of that stuff, but the question is the jump shot. He actually shot it decent off of the dribble, which is kind of the opposite of what you usually see from these guys, but he actually doesn't look good in the catch and shoot whatsoever. Didn't even break the 30% mark from 3 this past season, and if he is going to become the player he's capable of becoming and reach his ceiling, then that's really the skill that needs to improve. If he does it, this is another guy I could see being an all-star one day. But if the shooting doesn't come along, I think he's more of a guy who slots in as the 5th best player on a good team, which is still a valuable guy to have, but not really what you're looking for with the 5th overall pick. So I think it was a worthwhile gamble for the Cavaliers in taking a shot at a guy who has a very high ceiling but also a bit of a lower floor. But I like it for them. I think he's a perfect fit for the roster, and I'm excited to see what his rookie season looks like. I think he's a sneaky Rookie of the Year candidate as someone that's going to come in and get a lot of playing time immediately. So, once again, big Isaac Okoro fan. I didn't have him as high on my draft board as some did. I think he was 8th or 9th, but I do think that this is the right spot for him, and I'm a fan of what he's going to be able to bring to this team. The next guy we're going to talk about here is Cedi Osman, and Osman is actually going to really benefit from them bringing in Okoro. I think those two are going to be able to play alongside each other because Osman can cover up for a lot of Okoro's struggles on the offensive end of the floor. Osman can handle the ball. He can shoot it. He's a solid playmaker from the wing position. Overall, kind of a jack of all trades on the offensive end. Does whatever you need him to do aside from create his own shot. However, on defense, that's where the struggles come. And I shouldn't even say struggles because he's not bad, but he's not someone that you can count on to take on the most difficult matchup night in and night out on the defensive end of the floor. That person who can take on that matchup is Isaac Okoro. So now you're going to be able to see Cedi step back and guard secondary type guys on the opposing team's offense. That's going to help him to utilize his basketball intelligence as a rotational guy who can make the right decisions on defense, utilize that basketball IQ, and become an impactful player on the defensive end of the floor. That plus his skills on offense make him a very interesting guy for the Cavaliers, who I think is going to do a really nice job providing backup minutes from the wing, and maybe he'll even start over Isaac Okoro to start off the season. Rounding out the wing position for this team is Dylan Windler, the 26th overall pick in the 2019 NBA draft. Windler missed the entire season, if I'm not mistaken, with like a broken leg. So that was not really what you would have wanted to see if you were a Cavs fan. But with Windler, we didn't really have to see him play. We know what we're getting. He could shoot it, and he can't do much else. I think he'll be at least solid on defense because he has a smart basketball IQ, but he's not super athletic, and that will prevent him from being a guy who can take on difficult matchups on the defensive end of the floor. And on offense, he doesn't have much ability off of the bounce, but he actually was a pretty good cutter during his time at Belmont, I believe. So that could bring a little extra wrinkle to the Cavaliers' offense as someone who can cut all over the floor and also be a good three-point shooter. So I'm excited to see him in action next year, and the Cavaliers should be happy to have him coming back off of that injury. Now, move on to the big man positions, and we'll start with Kevin Love. Love is someone that we've been talking about being in trade rumors for a couple years now. People thought that he could have been on the move, but he's stayed put in Cleveland so far, and considering how high that contract is, I would expect that trend to continue. I do think that he does have some value for the Cavaliers, though. He's a smart offensive player who can create spacing for their young guards as a three-point shooter, and that is something that they should really value. He's going to be able to develop a nice pick-and-roll game with the young guys like we saw last season, and his basketball IQ and veteran experience is going to be valuable on this rebuilding team. I think that there's probably a different position that he'd like to be in where he's competing for championships like he was when LeBron and Kyrie were on this team. But at this point, he's not going to be a super tradable guy, and he can bring value to this team and help them to improve. So that's kind of where I'm at on Kevin Love at this point. I don't think he's likely to get traded at least for another year or two. But I still do think that he's a good player, especially on offense where he brings that basketball IQ and brings that shooting. His defense is not so good. He's been a defensive liability for the entirety of his career, and that has not changed. But because of the offensive stuff, he's still valuable to the Cavaliers, maybe more valuable to them than he would be to another team. Although being on a team that had more wing players could help him out a bit, but now that the Cavs do have a good wing defender in Okoro, that could limit the defensive liabilities that Love has. But overall, still has a purpose on this team and someone that I think will be on this roster for a little while at least into the future. They at least should not give up assets to trade Kevin Love. If they're willing to get a couple assets, as poor as they might be, if you can get any sort of value while offloading that contract, I think it would be a good move for the Cavs. But considering the point of their rebuild they're at, they're not in a place where they should be looking to attach picks to trade Kevin Love. Larry Nance is the next guy here, and Larry is one of the better role players in the NBA. He really does his job, plays good defense, good rotational guy on the defensive end of the floor. He does a nice job protecting the rim, plays smart in pick and roll defense, and overall is a plus rebounder as well. On offense, he can handle the ball a little bit, is good in dribble handoffs, and as I've mentioned before, is a great screen setter, and I very much value good screen setting. So, Larry Nance, good role player, not much more than that. I think he could get a lot of value in a trade from a contending team, maybe even a late first round pick. However, he is useful to the Cavs still because he's not super old in age, and he can help out their young players by adding another plus defender. So I think they'll probably hang on to him, but if I were a contending team, I would really be thinking about trying to add Larry Nance as a big man off the bench who just makes all the right decisions. Dean Wade is the next guy, someone that they gave a guaranteed deal to this past summer. He is a three-point shooter and not a whole lot else. He's probably a 4 because he's too small to play the 5, but he's also pretty slow and can't really guard 4s. So I don't really see a whole lot of value for this guy in the NBA, and I don't think that he's going to get too many minutes, but he can shoot the 3, and that's good. Moving on to the true centers here, we have Andre Drummond and JaVale McGee. Drummond is a great rebounder. That's really the most valuable skill that he brings to the table. Offensive rebounding, he's great. Defensive rebounding, he's great. But really, the value comes on the offensive end of the floor, where he's able to create extra possessions for your team. And on a team that has so many low percentage shooters like the Cavs do, having a guy that can clean up the glass is going to be super valuable to you. He's not good defensively, and I saw a statistic that when Garland, Sexton, and Drummond were on the floor together prior to the NBA's shutdown and prior to Garland's injury, they were allowing 131 points per 100 possessions. League average is about 112, I think. So that gives you an idea of how terrible that trio was defensively. Drummond has to improve on that end, and we've seen him do that a bit, but he needs to take another step on defense if he wants to be a truly valuable center in today's NBA. He also does not have much value on offense. He's not a great rim runner, and he can't really shoot it yet. So, Andre Drummond, professional rebounder. JaVale McGee is a bit more interesting to me as someone that can set hard screens, roll to the rim, catch lobs from guards, and finish. On defense, he can play drop coverage, guard centers, and protect the rim. Pretty simple player archetype with JaVale, and he's going to play the role that he's going to play. And in this case, it's coming off the bench as a center. However, I do think that if there's a team that does need a stopgap center to fill in, the Cavs probably could get a second-round pick in exchange for JaVale. If they want to do that, then that deal would probably be on the table because he's on a fairly cheap contract. However, he does still have some value to them because he's a good NBA player and someone that you can trot out there alongside your young core. So if you want to hang on to him, pay him his cheap deal and keep him around as a backup center who can give your team some experience as a good veteran player, then that's absolutely fine. I think it was a great trade by the Cavs to turn 2 end-of-the-bench guys into JaVale McGee, and they're either going to be able to extract extra value out of him or keep him around as a decent role player. The last guy that this team currently has under contract is Lamar Stevens, who's on a 2-way contract. I think this was a sneaky good pickup for the Cavs because Stevens profiles as a decent wing player who is good defensively out of Penn State. He does need to work in order to become an NBA level player, but I do think that it was a decent flyer to take if you were the Cavs. And I'm a pretty big fan of Stevens. I liked what he did at Penn State. As a Big Ten fan, I got to see quite a bit of him. So, yeah, that's pretty much the Cavs roster at this point. They're not anything special. This team isn't going to be great, but I at least think they can be entertaining. They have some intriguing young players like Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, Isaac Okoro, Kevin Porter Jr., and they have some skilled veterans like Kevin Love and Andre Drummond. But I don't know that the defense is going to be any good. They're probably a bottom 2 or 3 defensive team still at this point, even with the addition of Okoro. And on offense, I don't think that they're going to be much better than the 20th best offense. So the combination of those two factors is going to make this team pretty bad. I would say that in a regular season, I would have them pegged for between 20 and 25 wins, which means that in this odd 72-game shortened season, there's something more like a 18 to 22 win team. I think that sounds about right to me. So, yeah, Cleveland Cavaliers, interesting team. I don't think they're going to be very good, but intriguing young players. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you think the Cleveland Cavaliers record will be this season. How good do you think they can be? Let me know. I think that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.